So welcome to Caribbean Studies again, another week. So we're in week 8. We're moving right along. We've actually covered more weeks than this is more than halfway through the course. And so we've covered more weeks than we will cover in the second half of the course. So you'll find that the next half of the course will rely a lot on your group work and notes and the hypothesis application for close reading and annotation and so we'll still continue to have the videos and things like that, but I'm going to be relying a lot on your group dynamics, and also in terms of the close reading. We have some, this is the midterm is posted, it's available, but this is not the only assessment you're going to have. We're going to have quite a few little assessments in between so that you can be fairly graded. All right, so don't underestimate the importance of group work. I noticed that some of the students in the groups are not doing the required work, and this is going to impact your final grade. Also, the group need to identify their group members and what they're responsible for. Okay, so the Columbian Exchange basically is the movement of diseases, livestock, and fruits and vegetables from the old world to the new world, and vice versa. But more so from the old world, which is Europe, Asia, and Africa, to the new world, which is the Americas, which includes the Caribbean. So you can see these um, items here that have actually made this, to be considered to, this turning point in global history. And so just really, I know that many of you will have been exposed to this in high school. So this is not the essence of this exercise today. It's just a refresher. And to the extent that the Neo-Columbian Exchange built on the traditional Columbian Exchange, the first Columbian Exchange, you will have to get a sense of what the Columbian Exchange is in the first place. So this is why this review, slide review is important for you to pay attention to. But how does the impact of colonialism and slavery influence the creolization of Caribbean culture? Creolization basically relates to the situation where people from various parts of the world came together and created a particular culture in a new place. And in this case, the Caribbean. So in the Caribbean, we have the various African groups that created the African experience of many of the enslaved. You have the many European cultures that came together as colonizers, or just as like poor whites that came over. And you also had Asians. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But also, not to be underestimated, the uh, the the input of the Native Americans, the Taino and the Kalinagos, within this whole culture as well. Oftentimes, it is not appreciated as much as it should, but it's very, as we noted in the earlier phase of this book, of this course, um, it's not something to be missed. Okay, so what was the Neo-Columbian Exchange? The Neo-Columbian Exchange basically can be considered to be the Columbian Exchange on steroids, meaning that it was ratcheted up substantially. So basically, this concept came from someone named Alfred W. Crosby in his environmental history book, The Columbian Exchange. So the idea is that there is this um, new measure that was realized in this exchange, right? And so it is called a NEO, meaning New Columbian Exchange. And so, what is the Greater Caribbean? The Greater Caribbean should not be considered, not be confused with the Greater Antilles. We have encountered this term before, Greater Caribbean. We first got used to it in the readings of Boswell when he spoke about the Greater Caribbean, which basically is the entire area washed by the Caribbean Sea. So this includes all of the Caribbean islands, but also includes the mainland countries of Central America and South America. So, we're talking about parts of Mexico, Guatemala being part of this, Honduras, Belize, El Salvador to a certain extent, um, but particularly Nicaragua, Costa Rica, uh, Panama, and then as we go to South America, Colombia, Venezuela, um, the Guyanas, meaning the Spanish, French, and Dutch Guyana. Guyana that we know of today, but also French Guyana, which is a territory on South America, French territory, French controlled territory, and then Suriname. Okay, so just really just becoming familiar again with that term Greater Caribbean and not to be confused with the Greater Antilles. So the basic premise of this book uh, by, uh, by this man is that the uh, the landscape of the Greater Caribbean went through this process of major ecological globalization since the arrival of European explorers and settlers from 1492, the arrival of Columbus, to the present. So the character of this globalization has changed over time, but a capitalist mode of commodity-led economic development drove the Neo-Columbian Exchange continues today. So that period that is considered to be the Neo-Columbian Exchange is 1720 to 1930, roughly speaking. Okay, so this is your notes, and you will have access to this, so you can, copy it, and because we'll be doing quizzes and further exercises to make sure that you grasp the essence of this, the continuing lessons in this course. Globalization is nothing new. I mean, it is really accelerated at this present time, but it's been something that has marked life in the Caribbean. Life in the Caribbean is characterized by globalization. So from the beginning of this Columbian Exchange, the first Columbian Exchange, you had this huge globalization, right? And we said before that diseases was a very important factor. Today we're living through this pandemic, right? And one of the factors of this pandemic is that it began in Asia, uh, went to Europe, in the case of Italy in particular. So it began in China, Hunan uh, province, and moved to Italy. And then from Italy, it spread throughout different parts of Europe, but it certainly arrived in the United States around the same time as well, in the Americas. So it's very similar to the fate met by the Taino people, where they were not exposed to a certain set of diseases. We're also experiencing this, and this is not something that we can equate exactly, because this disease is one in which that it impacts all of humanity, right? Um, but it's very interesting. I placed an article in your folder um, on the fact that an enslaved person was the first person to actually uh, help in the beginnings of an inoculation. Um, inoculation of this of a similar pandemic. Caribbean workers were brought, enslaved people were brought to Boston, and it was found that disease, like a particular disease called smallpox, was wreaking havoc on in their slave quarters. And it got to the extent that their slave quarters was actually labeled in red, basically meaning do not go, like people, other people should not go there. And then um, so it was people, it was spreading like wildfire. An enslaved ship came, a ship of enslaved people from Africa came, and one of the enslaved people eventually said, I've had smallpox. I've had this disease before, and actually, I was healed in Africa, and I never and they made me words to that effect, inoculated, so I can't get it again. And so the slave master became very curious, and he's like, "What happened? What did you do?" He said, "Oh no, they used pus from my disease, from the smallpox, and they inserted it into a cut, like any wound or whatever that I had on my body, and that developed antibodies for the smallpox." He didn't say it exactly in that scientific term, because these things evolve over time. But certainly in Africa, they had a certain way of treating illnesses that the Europeans were not privy to. And in fact, it later turned out that it was also used in India and China and Turkey and so on and so forth. So these people were very much more advanced in some ways than the Europeans. But in any case, so this was the beginnings of this inoculation. This pandemic that we're experiencing right now, um, inoculation is one of the ways in which we're treated. Okay, so I got my shot last Saturday, and I'm going to get the second one in April. But anyway, so this is part of the whole globalization experience as well. Some of the ideas that came through from different parts of the world to deal with problems that emerged. All right, so one of the things that we realized with the globalization, I'm looking at my time because this is I don't want this to be very long. The globalization, the Neo-Columbian Exchange, which I also call globalization, is that these European empires created industries whereby, like, they develop higher yielding plant species and factories that they created to do that kind of experiments. So, like, for example, the British had their Royal Botanical Garden in a particular part of England called Kew. And, the French had their labs, their botanical gardens in places like Mauritius and Reunion in the Indian Ocean, in the Caribbean as well, in Guadeloupe, Martinique, and French Guiana. They use those places as laboratories for experimenting in crops. So high yielding crop will be brought from some part of the Indian Ocean or from another part of the colonized world, and will be sort of like blended with another. The species will be fused, and it will create, in some cases, higher yields. In some cases, the plants will have greater resistance to diseases and those kind of things. So these were the things that were developed. Um, so you had all of these various European powers were doing similar things. And it was the investment that they used from their exploitation, the gross exploitation of the Taino and the Africans, were used to invest in those enterprises. So the Neo-Columbian Exchange drove the region's dramatic expansion in agricultural production, and the downside is that it led to ecological impoverishment and diseases and fragility. Okay, so we see that in Cuba, similar situation. Cuba being the largest Caribbean territory, they were able to use much of the land there for that kind of experimentation with sugar. And this American planter, Edwin Atkins, established an accumulation garden in Cienfuegos in Cuba, and so on and so forth. And the larger territories of the Greater Caribbean, um, you had a transportation revolution developing there. So, like, for example, in the big rivers in places like South America, Central America, they were able to use these steamships to navigate deep into the territories, right? So the steamships that propelled the Neo-Columbian Exchange were made of steel driven by steam and fueled by wood or coal. So that's very different from what we inherited from what we experienced in the early period, whereby like the ships relied on wind energy, and now they're being propelled by by higher technology. And so that the implications of that are great, and you will see that in the passage that you will read in Hypothesis. People were moved from one place to the next in greater speed. Things that trips that used to take months and months will take mere weeks or even days. So there was a revolution in transportation, reduced the likelihood that organisms will survive the oceanic crossings, right? So they were able to actually benefit from that in those ways. All right. So this is a quick summary, and you have this notes. But an important aspect of the Neo-Columbian Exchange, which we have to address, is the movement of people. So basically, in a summary, Britain controlled much of India and part of China and Java and those places in the East Indies. In fact, the East Indies were kind of similar to the so-called West Indies in terms of their colonial possessions. So don't forget, when Columbus made his accidental discovery here, they wanted to get to the East Indies or to India, and in particular for the spices. So they were able to actually realize this now with the accidental conquest of the West Indies by Columbus. So the fact that Britain controlled much of India, and India has a large population, they were able to exploit those people as well. And they introduced huge amounts of East Indians in a scheme called indentured servitude to places like Trinidad, Guyana, Jamaica, Grenada, and so on and so forth. So these people became important, population bases in the Caribbean. Okay, so you have close to 750,000 people that were brought to the Caribbean in this fashion. And I think I skipped a slide, yeah. And half of that, or 500,000 of these people came to the British Caribbean. But significant others went to places like Guadeloupe, Martinique, Suriname, and so on. Okay, majority of them came from India. A smaller percent came from China and Java that were controlled by the British. Okay, so basically a quick review of terms as we close. The Greater Caribbean, we already explored this. Greater Caribbean, you know what this means, the old world, new world. Then mercantilism is an important concept that we have to interrogate a little bit as we close. So basically mercantilism is domination by the imperialist country, the empire, of the countries or the colonies that they controlled. And so they will amass, as you can see here to the left, they will amass as much as possible of the wealth, particularly gold and silver in the case of Spain, and will export more than they import. So that way they have a favorable balance of trade. And you can see the chart here. So this is very important in terms of how these empires were built. Okay, and then important structure of the colonies. This is more particular to the Spanish and the Portuguese colonies. So peninsularis basically means people from the Iberian Peninsula. So these people were at the top, and they had most power and the fewest amount of them, but they used their power to dominate. And it doesn't say Portugal here, but Portugal in the case of Brazil. But they used to be one. Spain and Portugal used to be one country back in the colonial era, not when they had dominated the Caribbean, but prior to that. And then you had the Creoles, who were born of these people in the Americas, right? And then the mestizos and the mulattoes are a mixture of all of these groups, and the Caribbean, sorry, the Native Americans and the Africans were at the bottom. So this is a quick, you can go over this on your own and look at this chart. So, in a nutshell, the Columbian Exchange was driven by agricultural growth and also increase in terms of the technology of shipping and botanical issues and the movement of people in place and from one place to another. Okay, so I will close here, and this is it.